Hey guys, Stephanie with AmericanMuscle.com here with a review and install of the BMR drag lowering springs for 2005 to 2014 GT Mustangs. We're going to be talking about a few different things with these springs, but mostly we'll talk about what you can expect from these springs in both the performance and looks categories. We're also going to talk about the install as well. I'll talk more about the install later, but you're looking at a 2 out of 3 wrenches in the difficulty meter. The BMR drag lowering springs are going to be a good option for the GT owners out there that are looking for a spring that'll perform for both the daily driver and the drag car. These are a crossover spring that are made to function in both worlds, so they're soft enough for the track, but they give enough support to keep the body of the car flat and level through corners. Lowering springs have a big impact on the looks and handling of the S197 chassis, and these springs are a linear spring that are going to offer a pretty big drop for these cars. These springs will drop the GT about 1.5 inches, and like I said, it doesn't get much lower than this for the S197 from a spring, and it may not sound like it, but that's a pretty big drop. Depending on your wheel and tire setup, this drop is going to eliminate a lot of the wheel gap that the car has from the factory, and it's going to leave the car sitting nice and even, a little above the tires, but of course that can change depending on what size wheels you're running. Now a 1-inch drop, or just under a 1-inch drop, is pretty standard across the board for this year range. The car sits pretty high on the factory setup, so the 1.5-inch drop is pretty aggressive. I mean aggressive in both looks and performance changes. This drop will lower the car's center of gravity enough to create more track-like handling capabilities. These springs are really going to reduce squat during acceleration and reduce wheel hop as well. You're also looking at much less body roll during cornering and less nosedive under braking. Lowering the center of gravity this much means that these springs are really going to change and tighten up the handling of these cars. Now, if you think that these springs have too much of a drop, or you really want to hang on to some of those softer ride quality characteristics, there are a ton of other spring offerings that you guys can always check out. Now, these springs do offer a good amount of drop, but this doesn't mean that they won't work on a daily driven car. They'll work just fine. It really all comes down to your personal preference and what you want out of these springs. These springs were specifically designed to be a crossover spring between both drag racing and daily driving, so you don't have to worry too much about a rough ride quality. Now with that being said, I want to mention that these are linear springs. They're not the progressive rate springs that we tend to see that are going to change as you drive. Linear springs have a constant rate of force per inch, so they have one defined spring rate and that's it. So basically, as the load on the springs increase, the spring compresses an amount directly proportional to that load, and this makes a linear spring more performance-oriented than a progressive rate spring. Progressive rate springs, or variable rate springs, have low initial spring rates that'll increase as the spring is compressed, which makes for a softer and smoother ride quality. But keeping the drop that these particular springs offer in mind, they're still going to work with both the factory wheels and the pre-configured wheel and tire kits that are on the site. These springs aren't going to make the car difficult to drive places, but you will need to be a little bit more careful. They're going to be stiffer than the factory springs as well, so you will notice some more road noise, but I wouldn't say that these give a bad ride quality at all. It's just not as soft as factory. I do want to say that a lot of times when you're shopping for lowering springs, you're also shopping for things like adjustable caster camber plates and a new set of both shocks and struts. In this case, I wouldn't say that caster camber plates are necessarily required, but I will say that a 1.5-inch drop is about the limit of where you need a set of adjustable CC plates in order to get the alignment within spec. It's going to be close, so a set of caster camber plates wouldn't be a bad idea at all. As far as shocks and struts, this goes back to the drop too. I'd say that you can get away with the factory shocks and struts in this case. I'd also say that this is the case if you have components with relatively low mileage. Your shocks and struts have a ton of miles on them, I would replace them. When it comes to price, it all depends on how you buy these springs. BMR offers a full set for over $200, or you can purchase just the front or the rear springs. The front springs will cost just over $100, and the rears will cost right about $100, so you do have some options there. Now, as far as the price tag for the set of springs goes, these springs are going to be one of the middle-of-the-road options. They're not the most expensive, but they're not the least expensive either. If you're just looking to get your car lower and you aren't concerned with ride quality, there are some other options on the site that cost a little less and will get you where you need to be. So the install here is going to take about 4 hours, and I'm going to call it a 2 out of 3 wrenches on the scale. You need to have some knowledge to complete the install, so I'd recommend having a knowledgeable helping hand or taking this to a shop for the install, especially since it's always a good idea to get an alignment after the install anyways. This install can be done on jack stands if you don't have access to a lift, but as usual, a lift would be your best bet here. You're going to need a few tools, including a spring compressor, so make sure you have that before you start the install. You're going to need to get down to the spring and strut assemblies, so everything like the wheels, brakes, ABS lines will need to be moved out of the way so you can pull the assemblies out of the car. The spring compressor will help you remove the spring from the strut and install the new front springs, which are compressed and installed the same way. The strut assemblies go back the same way they came out, and the install is the same for both sides. The rear is nearly the same. You need to disassemble some items to get to the springs, but ultimately you'll be able to lower the rear axle to the point where the springs will be free. Just like the front, the rear springs installed the same way that they were uninstalled. No surprises there. Rubber insulators are transferred over and you can install new bump stops. And after the new springs are in, you can begin reinstalling the shocks and everything else that you want to install. That's about all it's going to take. Like I mentioned earlier, a fresh alignment after the install isn't a bad idea. Wrapping things up here, the BMR drag lowering springs are a linear spring with an aggressive drop and improvements in handling to make for a car that feels track ready. They'll drop the car 1.5 inches and leave the car sitting above the wheels and tires. The springs are not difficult to install. They're in the middle of the pack as far as pricing goes, and you can check them out more online right here at AmericanMuscle.com.